So here we have one more passage, and the idea is to read the passage and try to understand the central idea, the key ideas, and also summarize the paragraph once we have read the passage. So again, I am highlighting the four important points on the right hand side of the screen, and as you all can see here, it clearly says that the first point is you have to ignore the intricate details. So while reading, we will see if there are any intricate details and how to spot those intricate details and ignore them. It says map the key nouns. So whenever you come across important nouns which are frequently repeated, we have to connect all the nouns and see what exactly is the message they are trying to give. Get the gist of the paragraph, because this will help you connect all the paragraph and form the central idea. And the fourth one says leave that part which you find difficult to understand. Again, one of the most frequently given advice to people preparing for CAT exam is that when you don't understand something, don't worry about it, just leave it for a while. Okay? So let's look at this passage. We will read it from the first paragraph here. It says, some meteorologists have insisted that the severity of the drought in sub-Saharan West Africa and its long duration must be a sign of long-term alteration in climate. So this is the first sentence. It says the severity of the drought at some place, and that place is sub-Saharan West Africa. It says it must be a sign of a long-term alteration in climate. Among the theories proposed to explain this change, one hypothesis is that has gained widespread attention, attributes the drought to a cooling of the northern hemisphere. So until this point, we realize that two words have come, and one is drought in some place in Africa. The second is that to explain this drought, there is some sort of hypothesis, in the sense that there is some kind of theory. So it says that the hypothesis says that the drought is because of the cooling of the northern hemisphere. So what happens is you have the key nouns here. So what is the key noun? The first part is drought in sub-Saharan West Africa. The second part is the hypothesis is based, and it says the drought due to a cooling of the northern hemisphere. So these are two very, very important ideas, that there is an event somewhere, and to explain that event we have a hypothesis, and the hypothesis says that this drought is because of the cooling of the northern hemisphere. This hypothesis is based on the fact that between 45 and early 1970s, the average annual air temperature over the land masses of the northern hemisphere decreased by about half a degree Fahrenheit, approximately 1/4 of a degree Celsius, a small but significant amount. So what happens here now is the author says that there is a hypothesis that tries to explain the drought in sub-Saharan Africa. This hypothesis is based on the idea that the northern hemisphere has cooled, and how it has cooled has been given here. Several meteorologists have suggested that this cooling was caused by an increase in atmospheric dust emanating from volcanic eruptions and from urban and industrial pollution. The dust reflected incoming sunlight, causing the ground to receive less solar radiation and to transfer less heat to the atmosphere. Now, as I told you a short while back, that most of the time you will come across some sort of detail. And this is what we mean by a detail. The cooling has happened. The cooling was caused by. So the cooling was caused by an increase in something. And look at this detailing. This detailing happens where the author says that the dust was reflecting the sunlight, causing the ground to receive less solar. The cooling seemed to be more pronounced. That's fine. So what do you see from this paragraph? So let me finish the paragraph first. It says here, the cooling seemed to be more pronounced in the middle and the high latitudes than in the tropics, an observation that is consistent with the fact that the sun's rays enter the atmosphere at a greater angle farther north, and so have to pass through a more dust-laden atmosphere on the way to the earth. So we have finished the first paragraph. Now, some of you would have found difficult to understand this part of the passage, which has too much of technical details like latitude, longitude, and the passing of the sun, and the rays are slightly at some other angle, greater angle, and all those things. There is more of technicality, but the technicality should be ignored because I don't understand, so why should I read it 2 times? There is no need for you to worry about it. What do you get from the first paragraph? In the first paragraph, the author has highlighted a phenomenon. The phenomenon is that there is cooling, right? There is cooling in the northern hemisphere, but before the cooling, there is a drought. So what happens is how to connect the dots. There is drought in sub-Saharan Africa, to explain that there is a hypothesis. This hypothesis is based on the idea that the northern hemisphere cooled in between certain years, 45 and 70, and how that cooling happened, what that cooling meant, and why it was very much pronounced in some places is given towards the end of the paragraph. So if you map the paragraph, initially some phenomena has been described, the hypothesis has come, and that hypothesis has been elaborated at the end of the first paragraph. Then you have the second paragraph. It says, since winds are set in motion by differences in air pressure caused by unequal heating of the atmosphere, supporters of the cooling hypothesis have argued that the growing temperature differential between unusually cool middle and high latitudes and the warm tropical latitudes is causing a southward expansion of the circumpolar vortex, the high altitude westerly winds that circle the northern hemisphere at middle latitudes. According to this hypothesis, as the circumpolar vortex expands, it forces south other components of large-scale atmospheric circulation and in effect displaces the northward moving monsoon that ordinarily brings sub-Saharan rain. Proponents have further argued that this change in atmospheric circulation might be long-term, since cooling in the northern hemisphere could be perpetuated by increase in ice and snow coverage there, which would lead to reflection of more sunlight away from the earth, to further cooling and indirectly to further drought in sub-Saharan West Africa. Now this paragraph is going to be a big challenge for most of us. There is so much of technicality. The technicality is based on how geographically this thing might have happened. But then again, as I told you, that you have read the paragraph, you have finished reading it, you must have taken around 40-50 seconds to read this whole paragraph. The idea is that most of you, in fact all of you would have unless you are from the background of meteorology, you will not understand this paragraph. Now, what to do in the case if this thing comes in the examination? The whole thing is that, okay, the author in the second paragraph tries to explain the technicality as to how the cooling in the northern hemisphere must have resulted in drought in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, lots of things have been given. The only thing I understand from this whole discussion is that the vortex would displace the northward moving monsoon. So because of the whole phenomena, the monsoon that brings rain to sub-Saharan Africa is moved because of the cooling of the northern hemisphere. And because of this shifting of the monsoon, it's quite possible that the rains must not have come, and therefore this must have resulted in drought. Nothing else have I understood in this whole paragraph. What should I do? Just leave it for a while and go to the next paragraph. It says, next paragraph says, despite these dire predictions, and even though the current African drought has lasted longer than any other in this century, the notion that the drought is caused by the cooling of northern hemisphere is in fact not well supported. Now, what you have here is the author takes a U-turn, or rather he takes a critical turn. He says that despite these dire predictions, and even though the current African drought has lasted longer than any other in this, the notion that the drought is caused by the cooling is not well supported. So initially he says that there is a hypothesis. The hypothesis has to say this, and then towards the end he says that in fact it is not very well supported. Why? He says, contrary to the predictions of the cooling hypothesis, during one period of rapid northern hemisphere cooling in the early 1950s, the sub-Sahara was unusually rainy. So he says that in one period of rapid northern hemisphere cooling, the sub-Saharan Africa was unusually rainy. Moreover, in the early 1980s, when the drought was particularly severe, northern hemisphere lands actually warmed. So how can you say that the cooling and the drought are connected? And further doubt has been cast on the hypothesis by recent analysis suggesting that when surface temperatures of water as well as land are taken into account, the northern hemisphere may not have cooled at all. So what happens in the whole structure? So see people, when we are reading the paragraph for the first time, there is no need for you to go into all those intricate and minute detail, because the more you try to go into the details, the more time you will take to read the passage the very first time. And as a result of that, you will not have much time to invest in the questions. So when I have read this passage, what I realize is that there is a phenomenon, and the phenomenon is the drought in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you ask me, what are the key nouns that you have encountered? The first key noun that I encountered was, so I will write it down here for your understanding and see how we map the passage. The first key noun that I encountered was drought. in some place. So I know that drought is there in West Africa. Then there is a hypothesis to explain this scenario. It says that the hypothesis is based on a cooling hypothesis. The cooling hypothesis is based on something, and this cooling hypothesis says that in the northern hemisphere we have a cooling. Correct. So the northern hemisphere has cooled. Because of that, the drought has come. Then the author goes on further to explain the technical part of the cooling process, which is come in the second para. The second para becomes the most painful part for me because we haven't understood much of what is given. So it's all right. Second para has the technical details. If there is a question, I will come to that second paragraph. Right now, I should not bother about it. Then the author moves to the third paragraph. There he says that though the hypothesis might be true, it is not very well supported. And he cites some evidence from the past which is contrary to the cooling hypothesis. So this is how the whole paragraph flows, from the phenomenon to the hypothesis to the expression of the hypothesis and then to questioning of the hypothesis. Now once you have got the gist of the paragraph, you have formed the central idea. The central idea is that the cooling hypothesis to explain the drought in sub-Saharan Africa may not be convincing in the light of the previous evidence, previous meteorological evidence. That's it. It may not be very convincing as per the author, which he has mentioned at the end of the passage. So what happens when you read this way? First of all, you have ignored the intricate details because you're not bothered about it, and that makes sense. The key nouns you have mapped, and with the help of that, you have got the gist of the paragraph, and you have been able to form the central idea. And what did we do towards the end? We while reading the passage, there was one paragraph which was not very clear to us because of the technicality. The only part we understood was that because of the cooling, the monsoon shifted from sub-Saharan Africa, and because of that there is less rain. So we have left that part.